Philadelphia government operates efficiently and effectively with integrity and responsiveness. Today's presenters are laser focused on the word integrity in that city goal. With us is Chief Integrity Officer Steffi Tipton and Inspector General Amy Curlin. Both of these offices are committed and working tirelessly day in and day out to ensure that all of our employees at every level uphold the highest standards of conduct and the entities that the city does business with uphold the letter of the law. On the administration side, we have Mayor Michael Nutter, his Chief of Staff, Deputy Mayor for Public Safety, Everett Gillison, Managing Director, Rich Negrin, Chief Innovation Officer for the city, Adeli Bade, Human Resources Director, Al DiTilio, Director of the Center of Excellence, Jackie Linton, and members of the Phillystat team. As usual, Mayor Nutter will begin this meeting with some opening remarks.
Well, thank you very, very much. And this is just an incredible opportunity for us to further explain to citizens what running a government with integrity and transparency is all about. I would say that Inspector General Curlin and Chief Integrity Officer Tipton and her predecessors collectively and the respective staffs have helped to change the culture of the city of Philadelphia. We want to institutionalize that cultural change and impact our employees and our citizens in ways that help them to better understand that a safe city, a smart city, a sustainable city is really enveloped by a city that operates with integrity, that people can trust their city government, that the overwhelming majority of all public employees come to work each and every day providing high quality service. Unfortunately, as in any other profession or business, there may be a few who have not fully received the message or truly understand why it is so important that we have this kind of integrity-based relationship with the citizens of our city. And at the same time, some of our citizens or business people engage in activities in an effort to corrupt our public employees and rip off the city government. The door of integrity must swing both directions, and the work that you all have been doing through your offices and staffs has been stellar. I look forward to hearing the presentation. Thank you so much for your commitment to making Philadelphia a city of integrity.
Thank you.
Move that along.
There we go.
There we go.
So Philadelphia has a very proud and long history of corruption. That history has always been a joke. Political cartoonists were always busy, and in fact, back in the day when a number of judges were convicted of taking money from roofers, the joke in the city was that there should be a blue light on top of City Hall, like a blue light special, because city employees and officials could be bought for so little. Something changed. In the last administration, there was an FBI bug that was found in the mayor's office. And I think at that point, people no longer joked about corruption. And instead of being proud of it, people were ashamed. And the jokes just weren't funny anymore. So what that happened next in 2006 was that Mayor Nutter was elected mayor on a platform of restoring honesty and integrity to city government. He was no longer going to tolerate fraud and corruption, and the mayor said during the election that he was going to throw the bums out of City Hall. Part of what happened was he appointed me as Chief Integrity Officer and my predecessor, Joan Markman, as Chief Integrity Officer. We were former federal prosecutors, and each of us had spent over 20 years prosecuting public corruption cases in the city. This was our opportunity to change the system, to police ourselves, and to show the public that when we police ourselves, people can have confidence in city government.
Now we're going to get into the meat of who we are, what we do. And so starting with the Chief Integrity Officer, this position was created by executive order. It was one of the mayor's first acts as mayor. And he created the position really to promote integrity, honesty, and transparency in city government. So what does that mean? Over the last year, we went through a strategic planning process for our office to really develop and codify what our core mission was, what our purpose was. And you'll see here that is what our purpose is for the office, is to uphold the public's trust by ensuring the city operates with fairness and integrity, uncompromised by conflicts of interest, political affiliation, favoritism, and other unfair considerations. That's why we're here, that's what we do, and we'll talk in a moment about some of the strategic goals that really roll up into that mission. We have jurisdiction over the administrative and executive branch employees, and these are really the main areas of focus for our department. Gifts, contracts, so if there's unfair considerations when it comes to contracting or doing business with the city, we're involved in reviewing the disposition of vacant land and making sure that that's done fairly. Grants, open data, we've been very involved in sort of some of the city's open data areas, and then gray areas, okay? So we get a lot of, it's legal, but it might look bad, so the appearance of impropriety, and oftentimes we're advising employees on areas where we might want to go beyond what the law might require us to do because there is an appearance issue.
The mission of the Inspector General's office is to boost confidence in government by rooting out fraud, corruption, and misconduct among city employees and those who do business with the city. We have jurisdiction over all city employees, over any company that has a city contract, any nonprofit that receives city money. And basically we serve sort of as the watchdogs for the city and the city's money. City employees are required, pursuant to the executive order, to cooperate with the Inspector General's office, and all contractors are required by virtue of their contracts to also cooperate with the Inspector General's office. We can issue subpoenas, we can compel testimony, and we have recently, the mayor issued a new executive order which strengthened and clarified the Inspector General's office role. There's enhanced whistleblower protection, and there's a clarification of the integrity officer program. There are integrity officers in every department who report to the Inspector General's office, and that's clarified in the executive order.
So now we're getting into what we actually do. So this is really the executive branch integrity philosophy, and I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of our focus as the Chief Integrity Officer is really in the education and prevent phase of this philosophy here. We always joke that our goal is to put Amy's office out of business, right? So a lot of our efforts are focused on education, building awareness with city employees around the city's public integrity laws, and helping prevent some unethical behavior or wrongdoing by working with them collaboratively on developing policies, being parts of task forces and working groups. And so that's probably where we spend about 75% of our time, although we do have matters that we do investigate. We obviously enforce the mayor's executive order on gifts, and a lot of our efforts are around reforming sort of some of the policies that may have led to some unethical behavior within the departments themselves.
And on the other end of this philosophy, we spend most of our time, probably 75% of our time as well, doing investigations and then enforcing and reforming. The reason this philosophy works well is because there's a great deal of communication between our two offices, and there's overlap among each of these four parts of the philosophy. We work together in a number of these areas. So as I said, we do investigations of wrongdoing, and then we make recommendations for enforcement, and we work with departments to reform. We also do a lot of community outreach and speaking in the different departments, which is really the education and prevention part of it.
Maybe a quick question just for the general public and for city employees. What are all the different ways in which someone can disclose, report, reach out to people both within government and directly to your office? Mm-hmm. And can they do it anonymously?
Mm-hmm. We have a website where people can report misconduct. We also have a hotline. You can call our office any 24 hours a day, and the messages are picked up every morning, and we do return all of those calls. We also have people walk into our office. We have an investigator on duty every day who can take complaints.
And similarly, we have a function through our website where people can ask questions We also have a general email that folks can reach out to us to. We often get questions about, I have an issue, but I'm not really sure. Should I go to the Inspector General's office? Is it something for the Ethics Board? And so we really serve in that way to sort of refer people accordingly.
Thanks.
All right, so just getting into, I mentioned before that our office went through a strategic planning process in the last year, and that was really, again, to codify the main things that we've done over the last 7.5 years and really set the office up for success moving forward into a next administration. So these are the 3 strategic goals that we developed as part of that process. The first one really focuses on our role as being a proactive, responsive, and reliable resource for city employees when they have questions, for city vendors when they have questions, and also the public. And so this really, we have key activities and projects under each of these goals. So the main activities under the first goal are really our education and outreach activities, and also the manner in which we provide guidance. And I'll talk more in depth about each of these momentarily. The second goal is really around prevention. So this is where we're working with departments to develop policies, procedures to prevent unethical behavior in the departments themselves. And so we've been a part of task force, work groups, and also developed policies with departments as well. And then lastly, this is really getting at our transparency focus. And so this is really promoting the city as a model of transparent government operations through improving access to city information and also ongoing public engagement. And so some of the activities under that are our website Integrity Works, and also some of the open data efforts that we have been involved with OIT. So the first goal is about being proactive, responsive, and reliable as a resource to city employees, the public, and vendors. And so part of that was we started tracking over the last year the types of inquiries that we were receiving, and then also just generally the time it took us to resolve those inquiries as they were coming in. And this is all information that we now have out on our website so people can see the types of things that we're doing. And so you'll see here the top 10 inquiry categories that we had for calendar year 2014. The biggest piece of the pie is obviously gifts, because we do have oversight for the mayor's executive order on gifts, and so that's sort of our bread and butter. That's where we get a lot of those questions. Contracting is the next sort of piece of that. So questions around sort of if there's a question from a vendor about how a contract was awarded, or a question just generally around the propriety of the contracting process, we tend to get involved in those. And then we also receive a number of questions around conflicts of interest, many of which we refer to the Ethics Board, but we do get a number of questions around those. So those are really like probably 50% of the questions that we deal with. And you'll see that, you know, on average, it takes us about 12 days to resolve a particular inquiry as it comes in. And I just wanted to highlight the gifts inquiries, because it takes us about a day to resolve those, because I think that's really the main area that we focus on. So I just wanted to highlight that. Some of the other activities of this office are really around the education and outreach that we've done. You'll see at the bottom some examples of some of the outreach that we've done. We have a very active Twitter feed. That's where the Mr. T meme comes into play. We had a meme that we put out there to remind people to do their financial disclosure. So we also tried to make it interesting and fun for people too. We have our Integrity Week. We also developed some educational videos in concert with a mayor's intern group. So that's the House of Integrity video you see there. And those are things that we're going to put out on our website as well.
Stephanie,
Yep.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
And this is actually in neither of your particular areas, but I know you have engagement with all the public employees. So if my memory serves me correctly, all public employees at some point in time have to go to ethics training.
Right.
Correct? Where would you say we are in that process?
I would say that
Almost all.
most have probably gone through the training at some point since coming on to city employment. I can't speak specifically on the numbers because the Ethics Board has jurisdiction over the trainings, but I would say most employees have at least done it once. In terms of the refreshers that they do, I don't know how consistent that is across the board.
Yeah, if I remember, I was on the Ethics Board when it started.
Yep.
They touched all employees the first 2 years, which
Yep.
was a huge goal.
Yeah.
And I think, to your point, they're refreshing people periodically.
Right. Yeah, yeah. And usually that happens when people change positions or move to different departments. They might get ethics training again.
Right.
And that, I think that highlights one of the questions that we asked we did an ethics survey last year of city employees. And one of the questions we had was an open-ended question, and we asked them, in your opinion, what was one thing the city could do to build a stronger ethical culture? And a lot of folks said more education and training. And so that was sort of a key for us, because, you know, if we're going to focus our energy on sort of encouraging and putting out more outreach efforts and public engagement, you know, that sort of told us that that's where we need to focus. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of the other findings and what we're doing around those. The next goal for the office is really around prevention. And so I just wanted to highlight a few areas where we have been involved in preventative measures. We were part of the ERIC Control and Compliance Program with the Inspector General's office, and that was when we were getting the stimulus money, really putting control and compliance into that money to make sure that there was, you know, misuse of the money that we were getting as a city. We've also participated, as I mentioned before, in various work groups and task force. One here is the facilities task force that our office was a part of. And then also, in terms of prevention, we are doing a lot of education around sort of contracting fraud through our Bids Gone Bad workshop series, which is also something collaboratively we're doing with the Inspector General's office. We also developed some communication materials to help employees around interactions with vendors during the RFP and bidding process, and so that's the piece of collateral you see there, the vendors' do's and don'ts. And I will say that has been a very collaborative effort, as I mentioned, with the Inspector General's office. We've reached about 500 employees so far through Bids Gone Bad. And you know, that really came out of a policy recommendation from one of the cases that the Inspector General's office had dealt with. We thought that there needed to be a focus on that area. And then our last goal is really, again, around the open data efforts. We're part of the Open Data Advisory Group. We're one of the stakeholders that are a part of that group. We worked very closely with OIT to get contracting data out there. It was the first time that we actually had a real robust set of data on procurement contracts out and available to the public. We also have our Integrity Works website, which is a real public-facing tool that we use to engage folks, and it provides plain English guidance to employees and the public on those public integrity laws. We also did, as part of Integrity Week, a real outreach for the public to get them to come to one of the events during that week. And so we did a PSA with the mayor as part of that. And we also helped, we worked with the Records Department to get more financial disclosure information for high-level city officials out onto the website. So folks didn't have to submit a right-to-know request necessarily to get that information. They can now access it directly online.
And that's for the first time, I think, as a searchable database.
Yep, it's a searchable database. Now you don't need a login or anything. So we sort of helped remove some of the barriers to that information for folks. There we go.
Okay, so now we'll get into what the Inspector General's office does. And as you can see here, we do three major things. The first is administrative investigations, and these are violations of city rules and regulations. And it can be anything from a city employee engaged in theft of time or misuse of city property, up to a contractor who circumvents minority business rules and regulations. And I'll give some examples of that as we go on. The criminal investigations focus on city employees who might do something wrong, contractors who might overbill or steal from the city, and nonprofits people in nonprofits who might embezzle funds that is basically city money. The third thing, as we've talked a little bit about, are the policy recommendations. And this is what we like to say is sort of a full circle solution to systemic flaws that we may find in the system. So after a criminal investigation or after an administrative investigation, we will take a look at the department and say, how could this have happened? We'll identify some potential flaws, and then we work with the department to try to correct them and make recommendations. Okay, so the administrative investigations. As I said, these can be minor theft of time type cases or more serious ones. And when we do these administrative investigations, the first thing we do after a full and complete investigation is we issue a report to the department. In that report, we will recommend some kind of discipline for the city employee. If the city employee has stolen money or stolen time, then we will work with the law department to try to recover that money, possibly by taking it out of his or her separation pay. We identify flaws, we recommend changes, and then we will work with the departments to do that. So a couple examples here. An administrative investigation. In the beginning of this administration, you probably remember the case of Danielle Kelly, who was the young girl who had cerebral palsy, and she starved to death. Her family was under the supervision of DHS, and under the city's supervision, she starved to death. Now, the DA's office indicted the parents and the 2 social workers, and that would normally be the end. But we came into the department and looked at it and said, how could this possibly happen? Somebody under city supervision. So we went up the 2 chains of command from the 2 different social workers who were indicted. And what we found that the supervisors of those social workers were not doing their jobs. They weren't supervising. The managers of those supervisors weren't managing. And it went pretty much up to the top. And we ended up writing a report recommending termination of 8 city employees, and they were terminated. We also recommended that DHS engage some experts and make changes in the system to create better supervision, better management, and prevent that kind of thing from happening again. And that's exactly what they did. They worked with a lot of different city experts, and DHS today, I think, is a very, very different department than it was 8 years ago. An example of the settlement and corporate compliance agreements is a case we had involving prison health services. Prison Health Services had a multi-million-dollar contract with the prisons to provide health services. Pharmaceutical services, first aid kits, that kind of thing. And Prison Health Services represented to the city that they had 40% participation by a woman-owned company. When we looked into this, we found that that woman-owned company actually did no work whatsoever. The Prison Health Services was paying the woman-owned company 1% of the contract value simply for the use of the company's name. Now that 1% that they were paying was about $400 and some thousand, and they charged that back to the city. The city lost not only that $400 some thousand, but legitimate minority companies didn't get a chance to do the business, and the city was tricked by Prison Health Services. We entered into a settlement agreement where they paid the city $1.8 million, and we also entered into a corporate compliance agreement. Our goal with these types of cases is not to put a company out of business, but really to do 2 things. To make the company pay for the past mistakes and make corrections going into the future so it won't happen again. And that is the corporate compliance agreement. And in that agreement, they agreed to increase minority participation, increase training, have better supervision over who signs the documents that are submitted to the city. We now require either the legal counsel or the CEO or somebody at that level to sign the agreement. So if there's something that's false in there, there are people who can be held accountable. So those are the types of administrative investigations that we do. The second thing, the criminal investigations. And this is something new in this administration. In the criminal investigations, we actually work in partnership with law enforcement. We don't refer cases out. We bring law enforcement in, and we work as partners to do the cases. We do this because, again, I think that if we police ourselves, citizens have confidence in their government. And we ought to be cleaning our own house. We ought to be not relying on outside agencies to come in and clean up the city. And I'll give a couple examples of the types of criminal investigations. Criminal investigations where a city employee has done something wrong. The example is a woman in the records department. If you are in a car accident, you need to go to the records department and buy your police report. That police report would cost, I think, somewhere around $10. The woman in the records department who was responsible for giving out the police reports was selling them at half price for $5, but she was pocketing the $5. When we found out about that, we brought law enforcement in. When we had probable cause, we went to a judge and we got a court order to put a camera over her desk, and then we monitored the camera, and what we saw was that she was probably one of the hardest working city employees in the city. She worked nonstop. There was a steady stream of people coming into her office, handing her money. She was taking the money, she was putting it right in her bag. And that cost the city about...
Not exactly the kind of hard work that we're trying to do.
Not at all, but she was very, very busy.
Very busy.
Very busy. That crime cost the city about $800,000. She was convicted, she cooperated with us, and we identified the people who were paying her, many of whom were insurance companies, law firms who buy these reports in bulk. And they were also charged and convicted, and the city is in the process of getting full restitution. Regarding companies that might overbill, we investigated a company that provided IT services in a number of different departments. He was basically triple billing the city. The city lost $1.5 million there. And he, again, was ordered to pay full restitution. As far as the restitution goes, in these criminal cases, I testify at sentencing, and I explain to a judge, if the city lost $1 million, this is what we could have done with $1 million. We could have hired police officers, we could have kept we could have kept pools open during the summer, and that is pretty compelling testimony, and the judges usually order restitution. Okay, the third type of thing that we do is the policy recommendations, and we've talked about this already, kind of like what we did with DHS in the Danielle Kelly case. But another example is the case of Aromatic, where a company was ordering supplies but charging the city for much more expensive supplies. And the supplies that they were ordering were off contract, which they should not have been doing. That resulted in a criminal case, an administrative investigation where we made recommendations regarding the city employees, and then finally policy recommendations where we worked with the Chief Integrity Officer and developed the Bids Gone Bad training program to make sure city employees understand the contracting rules and don't order things off contract. So we have a number of challenges. With regard to the Inspector General's office, the biggest challenge we have is what we're calling leadership transitions. We operate under an executive order, which means that we serve at the pleasure of the mayor. In this administration, the mayor has pretty much given us operational independence. We are a separate department. We have our own budget. But a new mayor could change that with a stroke of the pen, could eliminate the office, could politicize the office, and we are hoping that there will be a charter change. Legislation has been introduced, and we're hoping that City Council will pass that legislation, and that would make the Inspector General's office a permanent part of government.
And similarly, we are a office that's created by executive order, so we are in a similar position as Amy, where a new administration could come in, have a different set of priorities, potentially eliminate the position if they wanted to. A challenge for our office really is around the complex and varied nature of our public integrity laws. I see our office as sort of, an ethics ombudsperson. We're trying to help employees and vendors, navigate what can be sort of complex, and you have a few agencies that are responsible, have some jurisdiction over state and local agencies, and so really when we're looking at our education and prevention efforts, it's really how do we help employees sort of navigate those group of laws. And so that's sort of what is a challenge for us at times, is trying to explain the differences between the GIPS rules versus, the code restrictions. And so that can be kind of challenging for us when we're looking at it from a compliance perspective as well. Okay, so some of the things that we have up on the horizon, we both wanted to highlight a few of the key activities or initiatives that are coming up for both of our offices. I will obviously use this public forum as a plug for Integrity Week, which is coming up in November, November 16th to 20th. And this was actually a best practice that we adopted from sort of corporate compliance. We are members of the Society of Corporate Compliance and Ethics, and they encourage private industry to have a corporate compliance and ethics week, which is also in November. And so we sort of modeled after that. And so we have a series of events that are coming up as part of Integrity Week.
We have two initiatives in the future. The first one is nonprofit oversight. We had an investigation where the CEO of a nonprofit called Self embezzled a bunch of money. Self provided services to homeless people. So the CEO was really stealing from some of the most vulnerable people in our population. And we thought that it would be important to have a little bit more oversight over the nonprofits that are receiving city money. And we are putting together a task force with the FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Attorney General, and the DA, so we can work together to try to protect the city money and to protect the people who need the services that these nonprofits provide. We also have entered into a memorandum of understanding with the school district. It has been going on for a year, and it's just been renewed, where we are going to serve as the Inspector General for the school district as well as the city and help them do investigations and build an effective Office of Investigations.
I also want to highlight a key initiative that's coming out of both of our offices, and this is the Integrity Toolkit for Supervisors. Going back to the survey that we did in November of city employees, one of the other things that we saw from that is when we asked employees if you saw criminal behavior in the workplace, if you saw someone taking a prohibited gift or violating the city's political activity restrictions, who would you report that to? And overwhelmingly, people reported those issues to their supervisor. And so when we were looking at that in conjunction with the other question that we asked, what's one thing we can do to build an ethical culture, and one of the top responses was leading by example or leadership by example. We had to make sure that supervisors were fully equipped to handle those complaints when they come to them, that they were aware of the public integrity laws, and that they were encouraging sort of a speak-up culture, if you will, making their employees feel comfortable to report those issues to them. And so the Integrity Toolkit is just a resource guide for supervisors specifically. We're going to do a training as part of Integrity Week for supervisors on the toolkit itself. But we really wanted to equip them fully with contact information, with tools that they can foster dialogue and communication as part of staff meetings if they want to facilitate discussion, so they can do that and make it a part of sort of what's happening at their departments.
And the Integrity Toolkit, as well as the other things that we've talked about, really go back to the main integrity philosophy here, which is the educate, prevent, investigate, and reform.
Is part of the toolkit going to be use of the various social media? I know that you've already incorporated that in your memes and
right.
that, but also YouTube trainings so that people, and I'm sure people work with now shop, you could actually put up scenarios, typical scenarios, have it taped, not even taped anymore, but have it recorded, and then they could actually play in different aspects of the toolkit, so that in real way and in real time, they could actually say, hey, this is what's going on, and then do you think I should, is this something we should report, yes or no, or just work that through, just putting that out there.
Yeah, and we have some scenarios, like a facilitated scenario that a supervisor can take to a staff meeting and sort of hand out, and they can have a discussion. We have notes for them on how to facilitate that discussion. And then going back to the work that we did with the mayor's interns this summer, we did have them develop sort of scenario type videos that we're going to put out as part of the toolkit as well.
Good.
Because when there's employee misconduct, really the supervisor has to take a little bit of responsibility there, and that's our goal. So we're not just going to be, disciplining all the low-level employees. We want to make sure the supervisors are doing their job as well.
Exactly.
Integrity is everyone's responsibility.
It is.
Right?
It is. And so when we're looking to the future about sustaining the gains through the next administration and beyond, these are some of the key recommendations that we would make as part of that. In terms of our office, we obviously would recommend that the Chief Integrity Officer remain a cabinet level position. I think that positions the chief integrity officer is someone that can serve as a convener and collaborator across agencies and really embed some of the policies and sort of the work that we do with the departments. We would also recommend continuing to do the ethics survey of employees biennially every other year, because I can't say that word properly. But that really helps to kind of get a pulse on sort of what sort of people's belief of ethical culture is in the city, and sort of where we need to focus our education efforts. And obviously expanding our outreach efforts, and then also, you know, we serve a role as part of the open data efforts, and definitely pushing the envelope and getting more city information out there as well.
And with regard to the Inspector General's office, we think it's important that the investigations remain centralized in our office so that we can have consistent discipline and consistent enforcement throughout the city. We do an annual report, which you have in front of you, which really shows a little bit of transparency, what we're doing. We believe in positive reinforcement, not just discipline, and we do that by awarding an Inspector General Integrity Award every year to a city employee or somebody in the community who has assisted us in investigations. And additionally, when we get employees who do the right thing, who come forward and say, somebody tried to bribe me, somebody offered me money, the mayor sends out letters to those employees thanking them for doing the right thing and for being honest employees. But in addition to positive reinforcement, we think deterrence is important, and we need to constantly send the message that we will be recommending discipline and people will be indicted or arrested if they don't do the right thing. We think the policy recommendations are really crucial because that is what enables systemic change within the departments. And community outreach also we want to continue because we can't do this alone. While I have a staff of investigators, we really rely heavily on tips from city employees and from people in the public. The case that I talked about, Kelly Lair in the records department, the way that case got started was we got a call one day from a city employee who said, it was a Monday morning, and she said, on Friday, I was out at a bar with a bunch of other city employees, and this one woman was talking about how she is taking her kids to Disney World and she's redoing her kitchen. And I don't know how that's possible because she makes $35,000 a year. So that's how that case got started, and that's the kind of way a number of our cases get started, with tips.
Maybe one question for you. So, as you know, when we started a bunch of years ago, I had committed to you that I would read every IG report that you sent, and they get sent to all the various department heads and managers in the government. And for those that recommend some level of discipline, up to and including termination, generally the report indicates that you ask the manager to get back to you within 30 days as to what they're going to do. And on the one hand, just because you recommend whatever the recommended discipline whatever the recommended discipline is, as you all recommended, does not necessarily mean the manager has to implement that discipline, but they are required to respond in one way, shape, or form. So from time to time, I know you've shared with me outstanding requests, not like a month or two, but many months in a few instances, and we had a backlog, and then hopefully we've worked through that. Is there much outstanding in terms of open cases not responded to by the managers?
Not at all. We have really good communication with the managers these days. And like you said, we may recommend termination, and the manager will come to us and say, I don't think termination is appropriate because of this reason or that reason, and often we will agree with them and change our recommendation. If they don't agree with us, they are certainly free to impose whatever discipline they want.
But they have to respond.
We don't have any backlog at this point.
Okay. All right. Very good. Very good. Stephanie, anything outstanding with you?
Not terribly outstanding. I would say that over the last 7.5 years, through Joan and Hope's work, we've built very, very good relationships with departments, commissioners, deputy mayors, and so I think continuing to foster that communication is really important. And so with that, I mean, we work very well with the departments, and the things that we worked on in terms of policy recommendations have certainly been implemented. Yeah.
one of the policy recommendations that was implemented, and I have to give you credit
Yeah.
for this, was there's post-employment restrictions. And we weren't telling employees when we were hiring them that there were post-employment restrictions. So we worked with Stephanie's office and Hope in making sure that our offer letters now
Make
inform
reference.
prospective employees that when you accept a city job, you know, there are restrictions that go with you even after you leave city government. So,
And that is sort of in line with the ethics training for all city employees. Stephanie and I, and Hope and Joan before her, we speak to employees in every department, especially where the employees are out on the street and they have contact with the public. L&I, health, OPA, all of those employees get sort of an ethics training from the two of us.
Well, we want to thank both Chief Integrity Officer Tipton and Inspector General Curlin for bringing us up to date on how far the city has come in maintaining and sustaining a culture of integrity. For more information and more complete presentation, please visit the Phillystat website at philly.gov/performance. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Awesome.
Thank you guys so much.